Hello, everyone. We'll get started right on the dot. I see as people are trickling in. That's great. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the first session of the WEPs Deep Dive series in 2024. My name is Nicole, and I'm a team member at the Women's Empowerment Principles at the Global Secretariat at UN Women. And as we recall, 2023 marked the midpoint to the 2030 to achieve the 17th Sustainable Development Goals, investing in SDG 5 on gender equality, which is vital to accelerate the achievement of the other SDGs. And yet the connection of gender equality to the other SDGs is not commonly understood in the general public, including in the private sector. And while private sector companies are realizing the importance of ESG and rising attention from investors holding them accountable to gender equality, the concept of gender equality remains vague for many actors across the world. So for today's session, we're breaking down the basics of gender equality and its linkages to the other SDGs and ESG. And we have invited two special guests, one from our web signatory company, Nespresso, and one from academia to expand more on this topic. And I will introduce them after opening remarks from Anna Falk, the global head of the WEP Secretariat here at UN Women. And so throughout the session, please feel free to write your questions to the panelists within the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen throughout the webinar. And if you would like to communicate with other participants, please use the chat function. Your questions will be answered during the Q&A session or through the chat at any time. And lastly, I want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and it will later be uploaded to weps.org to share with the general public. And at the end, we also will be launching a short evaluation poll. We ask that everyone please participate in the poll as it will help us improve in future webinars. And to get us started, I'm going to invite Anna to deliver the opening remarks. So Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and welcome everyone to this webinar. You may recall that last year we ended the webinar series with focusing on unconscious bias. And we thought that a very good topic to start the new year is to go a little bit deeper into what gender equality is and how it materializes in form of inequalities and discrimination, and also how gender equality and women's empowerment link to the SDGs. So as Nicole was saying, we have two amazing speakers with us today that will shed some light on this topic. But just to remind ourselves, for those that have been away for the holidays, that no country has achieved gender equality. And UN Women's estimate is that we are almost 300 years away. So this is a very serious agenda and a very complex one as well. We know today that less than 1% of women and girls live in a country where there's high empowerment of women and high gender parity. So this is, for those that are joining in from the Western world and from the North, might feel like this is not so complex for us, but I'll give you a few examples, and we'll hear also from Helen that gender inequality is a reality for many, many women across the world. And we also know that women are empowered to achieve, on average, only 60% of their full potential. So we might hear that, oh, the rates of education is very high among women, but that doesn't necessarily trickle down to employment and employment with a good pay. But just to kind of talk about a completely different issue is child marriage. Child marriage is a very serious phenomenon, if I may say that, or a form of response to various situations. At least 12 million girls are married before they reach the age of 18 every year. 12 million girls. And this is 28 girls every minute. So in reality, this means that today, more than 650 million women were married as children. And what implication does this have, being married away at such early age? It has implications on the completion of education. It has implications of how independent they can be. It often traps them into abusive relationships that they can't get out because they don't have any education or jobs, etc. And for those that think that, oh, this might just be for certain countries that have these issues, just to say that from 2000 to 2015, 200,000 children in the US were married away before 18. So this is not only an agenda for certain countries, it's gender equality is an agenda for everyone. And just to end with one other figure, before we hand it back to Nicole and our two speakers, one very important inequality and gap in the world today is the digital gender gap. We have 2.6 billion people that are still unconnected, and the majority of those are women and girls. And we know today that being unconnected means limited information, limited access to what's happening in the world, limited access to banking, whereas banking are becoming more digital, and many other services that our women don't have access to as a result. So with this, I don't want to start 2024 with a very sad story. We will also hear today some good practice, what a company can be doing to advance this agenda. And I hope to hear from you as well, what you've been doing to shed some light and to make progress on gender equality. So with that, Nicole, back to you and to our speakers today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna, for those wonderful remarks. So now I will move on and be welcoming our speakers for today. So we have Helene Perivier, head of the Presage program at Sciences Po Paris, France, and Sharon Anderes. She is a global corporate communications manager and the vice president of ERB at Nespresso. And to give some background, Helene is an economist at the Economic Research Center at Sciences Po in Paris. She is also the coordinator of the Evaluation of Social and Family Policies Unit and head of the Presage program. Her research interests include social family and fiscal policies and gender equality in the labor market from an international perspective. Meanwhile, Sharon is the driving force behind global corporate communications at Nespresso's headquarters, and she plays an integral role as part of Nestle's diversity, equity, and inclusion champions and stands as a valued member of Nestle Global Women on the Move, amplifying her commitment to fostering meaningful change. And her academic accolades include a master's in political science from the University of Geneva and a Bachelor of Social Sciences from Rhodes University. Hailing from South Africa, Sharon's path has spanned in the United States, Argentina, and Colombia, ultimately anchoring in Switzerland. So thank you again to Helene and Sharon for will be sharing their presentations with us and for joining us today. And we'll start first with Helene. So Helene, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. And thank you to all of you for attending this very interesting conversation we will have together on gender equality. I will start by saying that, as Anna said, we observe gender inequality all around the world. This is something that is obvious in many parts and many dimensions of societies. We observe this within family, in terms of the sharing process of tasks and family and task. We observe this in the labor market. I will talk a little bit about this in terms of gender wage gap, glass ceiling, sex segregation in employment. We observe this also in the political realm or in the cultural realm. Gender inequalities are everywhere. And there are many dimensions of it. There is this very tricky part of it, which is discrimination. And maybe we will talk a little bit about this. There are also some sort of bias, such as gender bias, that are very powerful, notably in terms of educational choice. So you can see that this topic is everywhere. And of course, I will not be able to touch upon all those issues. So I'm going to focus on a certain part of this, but we can have more discussion on different part of this. So as I said, gender inequalities are in different part of the society and also observed all around the world. So I will ask to go to next slide. Just please, Nicole, thank you. Just to say that we learn a lot in terms of knowledge regarding the process behind those gender inequality from economics and social sciences in general. So here you have just a very simple graph showing the labor force participation compared to GDP per capita, just to say that this is something that we observe both in high-income countries, low-income countries, middle-income countries, even though I'm going to focus on high-income countries and particularly on the European countries and the US, because I cannot talk about everything, but we will see again in the conversation if we have more questions on different parts of the world. So what we observe is that you have a gender inequality everywhere. So next slide, please, Nicole. So if I focus on European countries, and in particular on the types of model that we observe, there is this very well-known male breadwinner model, which is something that all of you knows very well, which is the fact that in a lot of couples, what we see is that the man is going to work and have the resources, then the women will stay at home. Even partially, the woman can take a part-time job or interrupt her career to take care of children most of the time, or elderly. Now it's new, but there is also this new burden that has to be done. So what we observe is this very strong male breadwinner model that has been supported by many policies in European countries in the first part of the 20th centuries. Since then, of course, and hopefully, a lot has changed, and we observe a huge improvement in these countries regarding gender inequalities. And this is due to many factors, but I really like to classify them with the different nature of those factors. First, we had political factors with feminist movement, women's rights, asking for citizenship, asking for having access to education, to vote, to economic emancipation, to participate in the labor market, and so on. So this is something that, of course, is a necessary condition in order to promote gender equality. You need to have people asking for equality. Then you also have what I call demographic factors. Of course, they are intertwined, obviously, but those factors are much more related to women having control over their own bodies. And Anna talked about early marriage, but also not having to get married or having the choice in the timing in terms of having children or not. So having control on the fertility. And for instance, there are many papers in the academia, starting with a seminal paper by the Nobel Prize Claudia Goldin, who has shown that thanks to the pills and contraception in the US, women have been able to get educated and to participate in the labor market. So it's a factor that has been really positive in that sense. So now there is a huge literature showing that reproductive rights are really important also in their socio-economic dimension, in the possibility for women to be emancipated economically. Then I will finish with what I call economic factors, which is more related to the structure of the economy. Of course, the fact that when you have economic growth, you have a more demand for human capital and skills. And then during the 16th, 17th, 19th, we have observed a huge participation of women in the labor market, driven partially through these macroeconomic factors. Then at the end, what we observe in European countries is a transformation of welfare states in order to accompany those movements, for instance, by promoting new types of family policies that are much more targeted towards work-life balance policies and so on, really to make it possible for women to have both a career and having children. This is what we call in social sciences gender regime. So we had a sort of a shift in the gender regime. Despite this, obviously, as I said, we still observe a high level of gender inequalities in all parts of the society. So this is something that I would like to dip into, even though I'm going to choose two different factors of this. So next slide, please, Nicole. So just to mention on the labor market, just to give you some figure and statistics, if you look at some European countries, you see in green the evolution of participation rates of men, and in orange you have the curve for women. Obviously, you can see that in all those countries I have chosen, you have a gap between men and women. Even in countries in which the level of female participation in the labor market was low at the beginning of the period, you can see that there is a sort of a catch-up. But at the end, you see that we still have a gap that is quite important. On the other hand, what we observe, and this is the graph just here, is that now in a lot of countries, and not only in European countries, we see that the level of education of women is higher in average than the one of men, which is puzzling because on one hand, they are highly educated, but on the other hand, they do not participate in the labor market as much as men. This is due, and Anna touched upon this issue, but this is due also to the fact that even though women are more educated, they do not get into studies that are the same as men. So for instance, we know that women are underrepresented in STEM. This is something that is quite well known. What is still puzzling for social researcher is why. So how gender norms are, why gender norms are so strong that even women or girls who are very good at schools do not choose to go in those types of fields. This is something that we work on. So there are many different explanations. Some are related to the fact that they are a minority in some fields. It's much more complicated for them to get into these fields. You might have something around also gender-based violence. So when you have very few girls in a social space, you might have more violence against them. So it might be also something that does not encourage them to get into those fields. You have also institutional environment. So the fact that the socialization of female and male students are different, so their choices might be also different. But this is something that is important to take into account. Next slide, please, Nicole. Okay, so there are, as I said, a different challenge that we have to tackle if we want to promote gender equality, or at least reduce dramatically the level of gender inequalities. So first, as I said, we have those gender bias. So I've talked a lot about bias in education choices, but this is also something that we observe in employment. As we know, there are huge segregation, both sectorial and occupational segregation, and the sector in which women are overrepresented are also the sector in which the wages are lower, for different reasons, but also because those jobs have skills that are not recognized at the real value they promote, and the COVID-19 crisis has really shed light on specific jobs that are really crucial for our societies. And nevertheless, the wages in those jobs, such as nurse assistants, for instance, are really low paid. And so this is something that is not easy, as those jobs are not really marketable, but this is job that the society as a whole has to give a value. So that's why it's really something that is not easy to achieve. There are also recruitment, gender bias in recruitment. So there are many studies in economics and sociology who have shown the gender bias. For instance, if you recruit someone in a very female sector, then you might give a sort of a bonus for women candidates. But if you want to recruit a woman in a sector in which you have an overrepresentation of men, you might have a bias against women. So there are many papers showing those types of bias, but they are still strong. Then, of course, I have no time, but there are discrimination process in the labor market. This is something that is also very well documented in social sciences. We can show it in terms of wages. Everything's being equal. We know that being a woman is a factor of having a lower wages. So this is something that is strong in every country. Of course, you have different levels, but this is something that is real. We also have discrimination in terms of promotion, and then we have a glass ceiling. This is something that you might know very well, but this is also something that is quite well known in social sciences. Then there is something that is much more structural, which is sexual division of labor. We know that when people have children, what happens in terms of the sharing process within couple is that this is a woman who is going to take care about most of the family tasks that are related to having a child. And again, there is a huge literature showing that after having a child, we see a really huge collapse in income of women, whereas you have a stability of men income. This is what we call child penalty in economics, and there is a growing literature on this. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you some graph on this. So you see, this is a very famous paper by Cleven et al. And you see for different regions. So first you have the child penalty in earnings in Scandinavian countries. In the middle, you have the same, but for English-speaking countries. And at the end, you have German-speaking countries. And you see that, so the plain curve is for women and the dotted curve is for men. You see, it's obvious having a child. This is a red line. After having a child, you have this huge collapse in terms of income for women, which is not observed in men. And even in some countries, we observe a slight increase of income for men. So this is something that is quite striking. It's very strong all around the world. If you want to have more precision on this, you can have a look to this Atlas child penalty that has been done by those economists, showing that in different countries with the same method, how this child penalty is strong and is something that we observe everywhere. So you see here that sexual division of labor within couple is something that is really strong and explain part of the gender inequalities in all countries, and in particular, even in countries in which you have public policies that are supposed to be very committed to gender equality, as it is the case in Scandinavian countries, you still observe a high gender gap and this child penalty that is statistically significant. So this is also something that is not easy to tackle. We can get in the conversation. How can we improve the situation? But this is something that is quite clear. Next slide, please. I am almost finished. Okay, so if we get into these child penalty issues, what we do know is that part of it is, of course, and it's going to be obvious for you, but part of it is rooted in gender norms. You have here a graph that show you the percentage of persons that answer to the question that women should stay with the child before going to school. And so this is to the woman to take care of the child. And in the other axis, you have the long run child penalty. And you can see that there is a positive correlation. Countries in which you have conservative gender norms, you observe also a higher level of child penalty in these countries. So you see that, again, gender norms are really tricky and really important to be tackled if we want to produce gender equality. And the last graph to also illustrate how gender norms are important, it's a question that is asked in different countries. Maybe you cannot see it because it's very small, but just to give you the spirit of this graph, this is a question that you ask people to answer the attitude towards gender distribution in taking parental leave. And the blue bar, the strong blue bar, is people who think that it's the proportion of people who answer that this is to the mother to take parental leave. So you see you have a high heterogeneity across countries. Obviously, in Sweden, in Denmark, in Finland, the blue bar is smaller, which means that people are much more committed to a sort of equal sharing of those leave. But you also have countries in which the blue bar is really large, such as in Bulgaria, in eastern part of Europe. In those countries, a lot of people do think that this is to the mother to step by from the labor market, to take the leave and to take care of the children. So this is something that we have to make do with by public policies in order to make it more obvious that this has to be shared if we want to produce gender equality and emancipation in general. But I do know that the private sector also have his part to play and his role to play in this long run toward gender equality. And I'm finished with my presentation and let Sharon get more deeper in this issue with the private sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Helene. Now we will invite Sharon to share her presentation. Sharon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and for having me, Nicole and Anna, and to the WEPs community. And thank you, Helene, for that contextualization and the research that you've shared. I think it puts a a great start to sort of what I would like to share today. And I think we're highlighting a really critical global issue. Anna mentioned, we're 6 years away from 2030, which means the deadline for achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But unfortunately, we know that the UN is reporting that some of those targets are moderately or severely off track. Of particular concern today is gender equality. And if you go to the next slide, Nicole, it's currently estimated that it will take around 286 years to reach gender equality. And this scares me, and it puts me into a bit of a panic mode. And I hope that this transcends globally this idea that we need to act now on this specific topic. It's not a woman issue. It's a human issue that's affecting all of us. I think for when we see these numbers, sometimes we say, oh, it's just a number, and it will go down, it's for the future generation to do better. But actually, I think that it's a call to action for all of us, not just the private sector, but obviously governments, civil society, and really coming together to show up for this particular goal. There are times in the year, of course, when we have an opportunity to show up, such as International Women's Day, and celebrating highlight moments like that for this particular issue. Obviously, I think we all agree that we should be celebrating and highlighting these moments throughout the year. But we have a special moment to do that, International Women's Day, and companies in particular, have been called out, and we are asked to really show up in advancing gender equality. And what we've seen is, companies or just organizations celebrating International Women's Day and showing up, and societies, these bots that have been created that say, actually, we're calling you out. You have not done what you said you've done. So I think it's just, again, a moral act that we need to be conscious of from the private sector, that what we say we do, we really do, because the community is watching. It's no longer enough to say that we're going to do something and not do it. And if you go into the next slide, I think really important to contextualize from a global perspective. Again, gender equality isn't just a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for peace, for prosperous and sustainable world. We know that the SDG 5 is not just a goal; it's really a linchpin for all the other goals. From eradicating poverty to ensuring quality education. Helen spoke a bit about that, but also it amplifies progress in all the other 17 goals. So I think knowing that we have this one almost superpower that we could use to accelerate, it really does hinge on us as a community to drive that one goal forward in order to reach the others, faster. So I go sort of from the global in general to specific consumers. So if you go on the next slide, we know that, sorry, Nicole, this is the next slide. Thank you, fantastic. So we know that in today's world, consumers, particularly the younger generation, are not just buying products anymore. They're really investing in companies that mirror and showcase their own values. We know that brands that demonstrate a genuine commitment to societal issues like gender equality are not only doing the right thing, but they're also aligning the expectations of consumers, but also society. It is no longer enough for private sector or private companies to say, well, we're just doing business. It's no longer enough. It's no longer accepted in today's society to say that. And so we're seeing consumers asking for brands to show up, and brands who are seen as standing up for key values are seen as authentic And this translates really into trust and loyalty. This goes to sort of, a new way to Nespresso. And if you go to the next slide, Nicole, what I did want to share is, at Nespresso, we have a core belief that the coffee sector really does have a potential to be a powerful force for good in the world, with the capacity to improve the lives and livelihoods of people, and to really regenerate and restore nature and biodiversity. And we've worked really hard to turn this into action. Last year, we marked the 20th anniversary of our AAA Sustainable Quality Program, which was launched in 2003 in partnership with the Rainforest Alliance to really help the future, protect the future of high quality coffee, but also secure the livelihoods of farmers that grow them. And so the AAA program grew from 300 farmers in Costa Rica to in 2003 to today over 140,000 farmers in 18 countries. So we've grown exponentially in the types of work that we do and engage in with the farms that work with us. In April last year, in April 2022, it's 2 years now, Nespresso became one of the largest companies to become a B Corp certified, and essentially joining a movement of companies that are promoting action for good, including driving gender equality. And of course, last year we became a proud member of the WEPs community. And so we're new to the community, but these are just really steps that are showcasing that as a brand, we really want to ensure that, we are showcasing our values. And, I highlight these key ingredients, and it's just really to as conversation starters. But for us, it's really important that as we show up in this particular topic of gender equality, that it is aligned, with our values, lived throughout our ecosystem, but also, we are around the globe in several markets throughout our supply chain, and ensuring that, how we show up on the specific topic is really globally adaptable, because it is going to be different, as Helen showed in the graph. It is going to be different in Switzerland as it would be in Zimbabwe, for example, or in the US vis-a-vis Denmark or Norway. So we really want to make sure as well that it's lived by leadership. And by leadership, we don't essentially mean top management, but we do mean everybody who is part of the Nespresso family, is a leader in themselves, and can show up in a meaningful way to these conversations and act, leading to sort of this idea of we can act in a meaningful way, but if we're not measuring it, then it's really not helpful to show that progress. And so these are some of the considerations that we have. And the last one, around honesty and transparency, I think this is a really critical one, because once again, as we've seen, consumers are calling brands to action and calling them out when they're not being honest and transparent. And what we're seeing is that if as a brand you show that you are on a journey, this is a topic of value, and you really want to lean into this societal issue, consumers and society will support you, because they are seeing that you're really authentic and that they can trust this is what you're going to do. And so by showcasing and measuring, it's a way of really showcasing that this is where we are, this is where we're going, and these are the steps that we're taking. And some of the steps that we're taking at Nespresso through the AAA program. If you go to the next slide, Nicole, just to highlight, we have a AAA gender program that was launched in 2017 as part of our gender equality strategy under the AAA program, which is really a keystone initiative that is holistic. We work with our partners on the ground. It's really about systemic change and a long-term impact. We really go in with the idea of, okay, this is a community that we work with. What are the issues that they're faced with? So it's about listening and understanding first before coming with a solution. And usually the solutions really come from the places where we work and the different communities that we work. And so as we work through our agronomists who are part of those communities, we're able to, with our partners, go in and really try to contribute to that systemic change that we want to see. And systemic change can only happen if you understand what are the root causes that are underlying some of this. And of course, we have some examples around the AAA gender program. And if you go to the next slide, please, Nicole. You know, we take a closer look at some inspiring examples, and you know, I could really go on about the AAA gender program because it's so dynamic and rooted in a real robust strategy. And unfortunately, we don't have enough time, but I'm very happy to link you to our gender specialist who leads the work, Melanie Lampela at Nespresso, to share more about our strategy and the work that we've done. So with this time, I'll just, you know, give you a few examples of the types of work that we do in Ethiopia, Kenya, DRC, Zimbabwe, where we have really tangible results in the work that we do. Again, this is long-term work where we go in, we understand what are the issues, and then, you know, work together with our agronomists to build solutions that respond to that. And it can really range to a wide range of specific topics, you know, from financial planning, decision making, to creating safe spaces for women, but also ensuring that you know, women have a place in the community. And this is, again, it's not about going in and wanting to, you know, quote unquote empower women, but it's about working with the community. And if you see these photos that were taken in Ethiopia when Melanie was there, we have groups where we work together with women and men farmers, and then we work with the men farmers and the women farmers, and this way we have more sort of room for expressing themselves as well. So there's very different approaches that are agile, that we fit to the specific place and area where we currently work. Again, for us, these are not just you know, numbers or statistics where we work, what we've done. These are real people, real change, and you know, hopefully implementing these so that there's a better future for coffee, but a better future and livelihood for the farmers where we work. If you go on to the next slide, I wanted to share a personal experience that I had the privilege of going with our gender specialist, Melanie, to Kenya last year to participate in a gender equality training of our agronomists, who then go into the farming communities and conduct the trainings. And one of the trainings that really sort of, you know, shook me, and no wonder it's called the power walk. But the power walk basically starts with everybody on equal ground, where we're all standing in one line. We get given a persona, and you know, very different and diverse personas. And the facilitator, you know, tells us of an opportunity. And depending on, so the opportunity can be, for example, going to a training 5 hours from your community that starts at 5 in the morning, or, you know, something like that. And you would have to look at your persona and move forward if you're able to attend that training or that opportunity, or, you know, move backwards if you're not able to attend that training or participate in that opportunity. And again, the personas are ranging from, you know, a widowed man or woman, young, older, migrant workers, owning land, not owning land. So really a variety of personas. And I think what this exercise does, it really puts you in the shoes of that specific person. And as we're going through the training, if you go to the next slide, we see that we are no longer standing in the same line where we started. And this reflects, in a way, reality. It reflects not only the reality in Kenya, but in all the other places where we've conducted this training. And I think some of the work that Helen has also brought to us today reflects this, is that, all things equal, depending on someone's situation and background, there's a lot that can change. And what we find is a lot of the people who were stepping back more and more were women. And it's very interesting that, it's a male agronomist, for example, in the training who has this, and just that moment of recognizing in that space who you are in that moment, and the injustice of seeing everybody step forward and you're stepping back. So I think this is really a powerful training that as an example, that our AAA program, our AAA gender program does. And we will share the links to our sustainable quality program, but also the gender work, so that you can have a look. And I really invite you to engage with it. And of course, if you have questions, feel free to let me know. So if you go on the next slide, I really did want to close with this really powerful quote that shakes me to the core, not only because I'm a communication professional, but because I really believe that, as a community, part of WEPs, as part of the private sector, but also if you're coming from an organization, an NGO, we really do have an opportunity and a voice. And so, we have an opportunity to use that voice, not to shout, not to be, proud of what we're doing or show off, but really to make sure that, those who aren't heard are able to be heard, and really provide that platform where we can actually contribute to a more sustainable and an inclusive world. So I stop here so that we can have more of a conversation and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Sharon. Now we'll be moving on to the Q&A portion, which will be led by Anna. And as a reminder, we'll be answering the questions listed under the Q&A function. So if you have any questions, now's a good time to input them. And I will hand it over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you so much, Helen and Sharon, for your amazing presentations. As I was saying to you both earlier, our community has a lot of questions. So I've been sitting here kind of reading through, and apologies to everyone that the chat function didn't work initially. But I see that we have people from basically all over the world, coming from the North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and basically every parts of the world. So the questions are also very varied. I'm going to go through a few of them. And I will give you an opportunity to both Helen and Sharon to tackle those as you see fit. Some of them might be more relevant for Helen and some more for Sharon, but you pick the questions that you would like to respond to. So the first one is about good practices in selecting KPIs, indicators for companies on parental leave. How do we best basically measure parental leave and see if we are making progress, both for maternity and paternity, and particularly for companies that might have presence in more than one jurisdiction. So there might be a certain parental leave legislation in one country and another one in another, and the third one it's something different. So how can a company navigate this space, and what would be good indicators to measure this? Then we have a question about, or more maybe a comment, and Helen, you touched a little bit about the childcare and unpaid care work, etc. And here's a reflection on the fact that supply and demand of childcare doesn't match up. And that is also leading to maybe in most situations, the mother is extending her leave to be able to accommodate this situation. So any thoughts on that and what needs to be done? Then somebody had a very interesting question about what has happened in the past 5 years in terms of the result in the change in society in response to the most recent social movements. Have you seen, and I think that touched a little bit about, Helen, that we talked about earlier, about how gender norms can be sustained during crisis or shift over time. So any reflections on how gender norms and attitudes have shifted over time depending on different factors? And then a very quick question, which I think almost I can respond on your behalf, Sharon, but the 286 years, is it for women or is it for all genders? And I think the figure that you have picked, but is about women's equality and not based on all genders, which might actually increase this figure further. And then there was a question about the most helpful tool to get women into leadership positions and address gender pay gaps. Is mentorship programs the best solution, or are there other tools or strategies, approaches that could be considered? And finally, and then I will take another round afterwards, but how is gender equality considered in regards to ESG and other factors that are captured in ESG, such as environment? Is the social, gender, and other issues not necessarily prioritized, or are they prioritized over environment issues? Some reflections on that. And then I will take more questions for another round, but over to Helen to kick us off.
Okay, thank you very much for those amazing questions, and very challenging also, not easy to answer to all of them. So I will try to do my best. Maybe starting with these childcare issues. Of course, in a lot of countries, even in countries in which there are very generous public policies, we observe a lack of availability of childcare. And so, of course, most parents wish to have a place for their child in a childcare system, but it's not always possible. It depends very much on countries. It depends also on educational norms that are connected to gender norms. For instance, in Nordic countries, what is supposed to be done is during the first year of the child is supposed to be taken by their parents through a parental leave, and then the child will have a place in a childcare after 1 year, 1.5 years. This is what has to be done, and there is no choice for parents. That's why also when those policies create incentive for fathers to take part of the leave, it's quite efficient because there is no choice. If the father does not take this leave, then there is no possibility for families to have another solution. In other countries, such as in France, people have, let's say, the so-called choice, but obviously it's not choice, and there is a lack of childcare. Some mother has to take the leave because there is no other solution. In other countries, there is not even a paid leave. So you see, you have an heterogeneous situation. What matters is not only the availability of childcare, but it's also the cost of childcare. Sometimes there are some childcare, but it's very expensive. So the trade-off between working with a low salary, for instance, and having to pay a childcare, or staying at home, taking care of the child, might be very tricky for some families. So, of course, what should be done is to enlarge the childcare system. And this is something that is a huge recommendation by the European Union through directives. It has also to be connected with parental leave that promote a sharing process between parents. So this is my first answer. Do I start on the other question, or do you want me to give the floor to Sharon, or do you want me to answer to?
No, go.
Okay.
You can complete your and then we'll shift over to Sharon.
So something around gender norms and their evolution and what happened during crisis. Interestingly, what we have observed, and there are some research that have tried to show what happened during the COVID-19 crisis and precisely during the lockdown. What we have seen, and it's very interesting in France, is that during the lockdown, parents did not have access to child support. There were no public policies to help them to take care of children. And some people have to work from home, but they also had to take care of children, their education, and so on. And what happened happened, obviously, that this is women who had to take care of this double burden. And it's interestingly, some people have tried to see what happened in terms of gender norms and commitment of men to equal value. What happened during those lockdowns is that it seems that conservative value has been renewed. So when you have no public policies to externalize part of the family tasks, what happened is that men seems to be less committed to gender equality, because then a lot has to be shared in terms of timing and things to do. So it's interesting to see the role of public policies. They are really key. And of course, there are also a lot should be done in the private sector, but I will leave this part for Sharon. But public policy are really key if we want first to support gender equality and also to have this transition toward more gender equal value, even though it's never win, because you can see as you can have backlash depending on the situation and on how public policies really succeed in promoting gender equality. Maybe one last word on gender equality and environmental issue, ecological transition. Just a general comment on this. From what I know with my research is that it's not clear that all those objectives are consistent one with another. Sometimes you might have, in some circumstances, something that is really good for gender equality, but not good for other objectives, such as environmental issues, and vice versa. For instance, in terms of the having more sustainable consumption in the household might increase the time that people have to spend in doing things in the household, such as recycling and so on. And it's regarding the gender norms, there are a huge possibility that this is to women to do these types of extra tasks. So sometimes you do not have a sort of a convergence in terms of objectives. So this is what is really tricky, and also why it is so difficult to achieve gender equality, taking into account all the types of objectives. And I give the floor to Sharon.
Thank you so much, Helen. And I think I will cover sort of springboarding from what you've said, the question around the ESG and sort of what I call the S dilemma. Is of course, the environmental factors such as carbon emissions, water usage, waste management are often easier to quantify. We've established the metrics, standards for measuring. So it's really simpler today for companies to set those targets, track progress, and report on them. And of course, this tangibility appeals to a lot of stakeholders who prefer sort of clear, measurable outcomes. Whereas in contrast, when we look at the social factors, which might include labor practices, diversity, inclusion, community engagement, human rights, gender equality, they are harder to measure. We're getting better, but the impact of social initiatives is often, qualitative and long-term. We always say we've got these amazing stories, but how do we show in a significant way that there are immediate or long-term but measurable results? And so I think that's one thing to call out. And of course, I think there are certain strategies to prioritize the S in ESG. Of course, I've alluded to the first one, which is developing clear metrics and goals for societal initiatives. So just like environmental goals that we've established, we need to really ensure that we have those clear targets for social initiatives, which is why I think it's important to have a strategic framework that supports the S in ESG, which essentially the AAA Gender Program does, is a strategic outlook on how we go about gender equality in our supply chain. And of course, I think integrating the social factors to core business strategy. So making social issues a part of the company's core values, and I alluded to that in my presentation as well, and part of the business model. So, including fair labor practices, diversity inclusion initiatives, community engagement programs, but really making it a fabric of the company. I think another one is really engaging with stakeholders, key stakeholders, employees, communities, customers, to really understand their needs and expectations. And this can really, these stakeholders can help shape these initiatives and how we could be potentially reporting on them. And again, being transparent and reporting. Today, we really should come towards this critical point juncture in history as a journey. We've learned so much from the environmental sort of aspect that we could translate into the S. And there's a sort of hesitancy around that. But I think until we really leverage strong core business strategy around the S, it is going to be difficult to integrate. And I firmly believe that the work that we do at Nespresso is through the collaboration and partnerships that we have, whether it's with local governments or NGOs on the ground, but also other companies that have the same values. And I think if we start to sort of build around some of those areas, the S will take precedence or equal standing with the other E as well as the G. So no easy answer, but there are solutions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sharon and Helen, for those responses. The questions are just trickling in, so I will try to summarize some of them. And because we are running short on time, I would also ask you at the end of your intervention to also give some top recommendations for our participants. But there are a few questions that are about men. And one question was about a top recommendation for male leaders and managers to work on this. Another question linked to that is also what can we do for men to take on parental leave? And there was an interesting reflection. Is it so that women are taking on this role because they are better at loving their children than the fathers are? Or is this a stereotype or myth that women are a better caregiver than men are? Then there was a question around, or maybe we can just continue on the parental leave. There was a question, Helen, and I think we had already discussed that last year, the difference between child penalty and motherhood penalty. And people that made these reflections talked about ILO using the motherhood penalty terminology. So if you could clarify a little bit about the difference between the two, and how can companies best support mothers to offset this motherhood penalty? And there was another question about the motherhood or the mother penalty or child penalty, if it increases by the number of children. So every time you have a new child, you'll feel this penalty more. Then we had any reflections, Sharon, if you have, from Nespresso's approach to women workers' health, but also what can private sector do more to move the needle on gender equality, particularly for SMEs? What can SMEs do if they don't have their own HR department, they don't have the capacity as big companies have? Any reflections on that? Then we had a question about when can we say we have achieved gender equality, and what are the 3 things that we should have changed? I mean, from my perspective, and I'm happy to hear Sharon and Helen, we can't boil it down to 3 things. It's a very complex agenda. There are so many nuances. As we saw from Sharon's presentation, the SDGs, it's gender equality is spanning all of the SDGs. We can't say that we need to focus on 3 things. But I think from a company perspective, so I'm also trying to respond to this one to save our speakers some efforts, is that if we have a company that are managing to attract talent, retain them and promote them and have a good diversity in the company, I think that's a great achievement, because that shows that women are eager to stay within the company and are not leaving because of toxic environment, etc. So that is a kind of a signifier in a way. And then finally, I think this is the final question, is around any particular products that you see consumer would pay a premium for. What is it that consumers are willing to pay an extra dollar or whatever currency you have? So I will leave that to that. And Helen and Sharon, if you have any final recommendations, please add those all as well.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to pick 3 questions that are precisely addressed to my speech. First, what can we do to make father taking more part of the parental leave? So it's really a tricky question because it's deeply rooted in gender norms. So as we said from the very beginning of this event, gender is everywhere. So this is really deeply rooted in the way we socialize children and so on. So, but some schemes of parental leave seems to be better to attract men. For instance, if it's well paid, or at least if the remuneration is linked to the past salaries, for instance, as a percentage of it. You have some countries in which you have quota fathers, which means that they might have an extra bonus if the father take part of the leave. You have also countries that make it mandatory for fathers to take paternity leave. It's true in Spain, for instance. It's also true partly and very recently in France. And of course, when it is mandatory, men have to take the leave, of course. So this is things that can be done, and little by little, maybe we can change a little bit the gender norms. Something around child penalty versus motherhood penalty, a very technical and good question. I'm going to be very brief on this. It's very close, but it's not exactly the same concept in terms of the way it is measured. The motherhood penalty, most of the time, it's a way to compare wages for women who have children and childless women. So you just you try to see what is due, what is the gender gap between those two populations, and you extend it to the fact that it's due to children. Then what I've shown you is some economists that have developed a new methodology that is based on what we call event studies. So I have no time to really explain what it is about. But here what you do is you compare the evolution of the wages of women before and after the birth of the child, and you do the same for men. So it's maybe more robust in terms of the way you measure the penalty in terms of wages due to children, but it's more or less the same issue. But even though it's not the same methodology that is used, so that's why in economics now we use more widely the terms child penalty when we use these event studies methodologies. Then there is a very interesting paper, and I regret not having put one slide on this, but I didn't want to take too much time. But there are very interesting paper in the US trying to see this child penalty and what happened for mothers who change firms or change employers after the birth of the child, or who stay in the same employers. And they do the same exercise for men and women. And what they have shown is that there is a penalty for women for sure, whatever if they stay in the same firms or if they change employers, but the child penalty increased dramatically when they change employers. That seems to show that employers trust much more the employees that they know. And so they have the feeling that when it's a female employee who has a child, it seems that they penalize her very much. And interestingly, it's not the case for men. And you see even bonuses for fathers who stay in the same firms. Just to show you that this child penalty issues is very interesting. And you can see it's a way to measure those discrimination that women have to face in the labor market, and in particular when they have children, so mothers. Maybe one last word. And I think I have answered to most of the question that was targeting my speech. One last word just to conclude. To me, and as I'm a researcher, maybe it's not going to be very optimistic, but as I let this part to Sharon, who will be much more positive. But to me, what is really tricky is that gender equality is not a win-win process. Obviously, if we face resistance, it's because some people or part of the population are going to lose or think that they are going to lose with gender equality. That's why it's very tricky. That's why we need to have public policies being very, very implicated and positive and active in order to face that resistance. So we need to have a government that are really dedicated to this objective of gender equality. It has to be done from the very beginning of the early childhood in terms of socialization, school education, labor market. We have to also to have law to tackle discrimination. So you see that there are a bunch of policies that has to be strengthened to achieve gender equality. And of course, the public sectors has its part to do, but I leave the floor to Sharon to give you more best practices in that sense. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Helen. I'll also pick just a few, given the time. I think until we fully recognize that gender equality is not a woman issue, the change is going to be slow, stagnant, or inexistent. When we start to step up and say this is a human issue, that is when we dismantle the stereotypes. There was a question around, the gender stereotypes. As long as we see gender equality as a woman issue, we're not going to move forward. And I think this is where ensuring that we embark male allies into conversations, into talking about gender equality, talking about the gender stereotypes, talking about the bias. And I cannot reiterate the importance of really taking time, to raise these issues, because if we don't and we shy away from them, they're not going to go away by themselves. So it's really important to have such platforms as WEPs who are really highlighting these issues, but also internally within our own organizations to have moments, not waiting for a specific International Women's Day or a specific moment in time, but to really actively have these open and honest conversations about where we are, where we want to go, and what steps need to happen to get there. And I truly feel that the question to what would consumers pay for an extra dollar, I will take that, because I think it's very interesting. And what we're seeing is that consumers will pay an extra $1 or even $5 to a company that is aligned with their values. So again, looking intrinsically, what are the values that we want to portray as a company, as an organization, and how do we communicate those? And how do we not shy away from the difficult conversations? We're seeing in social movements that there are moments in time where brands are called on to say, okay, where do you stand as a brand? And so looking at the core values and being able to speak to them in a way that really transcends human to human, in particular around gender equality, is really important for us to move the needle. And I think maybe just in closing, I think let's not underestimate the ripple effect that empowering women and men can have. I think that together it's super important that we take this journey. And I think as part of this community, continue the engagement, continue the respectful conversation, so that we can advance and we can be sort of that light. One thing I always say is, how do I ensure that I show up my very best in this conversation so that others are enabled to show up? So I think it starts with all of us individually to show up for this specific this important topic. And again, it's a challenge for this community, but also transcending to our own workplace and also at home.
Great. Thank you so much for these great reflections, Helen and Sharon. We have launched the poll, so we leave it on for a few minutes, but I have also posted in the chat our webinar agenda for 2024. There were a lot of questions and continue to be more questions about the role of men and the role of masculinity and parental leave and paternity leave, etc. And we will have the next session in February will actually focusing on masculinity in the workplace. So we will have as similar today, we have one organization that will talk about work across the world on the role of men in advancing gender equality. And we'll also have a company in the male-dominated industry that will be able to shed some light on how are they addressing this issue. So we would not go into further details. There was also a lot of questions, and thank Helen, because that was spurred by you, questions about care. We will have a webinar in May that focuses a little bit deeper on the care issue. So I welcome everyone to join us there. But I think there has been some really, and I'm not going to attempt to summarize the wealth of inputs from Helen and Sharon today. It's been an amazing 2 presentations and a response to all the questions. I think one element that I picked up was the importance of really focusing on root causes, not making assumptions that you think that you know what your local community or your employees or your stakeholders, whoever they are, that you know what they want and what they need. It's very important, and also as Sharon was outlining, to really engage in a very genuine way all your stakeholders as a company and not making any assumptions to get to the root causes on why. I think also another point is around the SDGs, and focusing on gender equality and women's empowerment is a very cost-effective way to address most of the SDGs. So we have the 17 SDGs, and focusing on SDG 5 would actually help us make progress on many of the other SDGs. And as we have done in previous webinars, we'll make a summary of this one. So Helen, I think the study that you had not included in your slides, we can put that into the summary, and for people also to benefit from that. Sounds very interesting, and what's happening when you're shifting jobs. And this is also something that we've seen in other parts of the world, that women have less mobility in moving from city to city from country to country to be able to make the same progress in the careers as men do. So mobility is also a challenge to progress, not only from a child perspective, which is a very important one, but in general, women tend to be required to stay where they are and where the family is. So with that, we will close today's session. Thanks, Helen and Sharon, and also thanks to Nicole for having kept us up with fixing the chat problem and also helping with everything else and your opening remarks. So for today, I welcome you to join us in the future webinars this year, as shared by the link in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.